I'm gonna record. Okay. Uh, I used to work in education data, but I am by no means an expert on the topics that I'm talking about today. I enter this conversation as a parent. I'm a Rockridge mom. I have a student at Oakland Tech and Julia Morgan School for Girls. I started paying really close attention to board meetings last year and discovered there's so much going on and it is so much work to pay attention. And that's why I started The Dig, with some friends. It's a newsletter recapping what happens at board meetings. And the mission is trying to make it easier for people to pay attention without doing the like crazy amount of board meeting watching that I do. And I have added some of my takes to the slide, but I tried to put them in blue so you knew when I was explicitly offering you my editorial take. So let's talk about some numbers. One thing to know is that OUSD spends more per pupil than any state in the nation and more than almost all large districts in California. And, that's not to say we have enough. There are a lot of high needs kids in Oakland. I think it's good that we're spending a lot on our children's education. But I think sometimes we approach this conversation assuming scarcity. And I think it's important to know that we are actually pouring quite a bit of money into our school system. That's the first number. The second number is we have a lot of buildings for a district of our size. The chart on the left shows the number of schools at districts in California of similar size. And you can see we are an outlier by quite a lot. So declining enrollment is a problem across the country. Across the country, districts are having really hard conversations about closing schools. But in Oakland, the situation is unusually acute because of this. Three, our buildings are not in great shape. We have $3.5 billion in facilities debt, which means like things we need to do to get our facilities up to the quality that we would expect for our kids. 39% of our facilities are less than half full. Only 43% are considered good in terms of educational adequacy. Uh, Very few of them have cooling systems, and this matters a lot because kids, when we have a heat wave, end up needing medical treatment. They like go home from school. All this stuff really matters. We do raise bond money to invest in our buildings, but we raise something like $700 million with each bond raise about every 8 years, and that's just not enough to put a dent in this. So we have a lot of buildings, and the buildings need a lot of work. And then the fourth number is we're spending more on contractors than other districts. And the contractors are doing things most of us would agree are good to do, like after school and special education. But Oakland is sending more of that money outside of the district to non-staff than other districts. So those are all just sort of like baseline facts to agree on before we get into this. So how we got here, I'm going to speed run through like 20 years of OUSD history and skip a lot, but do the best I can just to set some context. So first, a long, long time ago, and before I talk about these events, I have to acknowledge like decades of structural racism, redlining, incredible resistance to racism in Oakland's history that I'm not going to talk about because that's a PhD's worth of history. But around the 2000s, like the beginning of this millennium, there was a big community movement demanding smaller schools because kids were stuffed into buildings where they actually had to have shifts about when they were allowed to go to school. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which at the time believed that small schools were a really great idea, gave us a lot of money. We opened 40 new schools. Very soon after that, we ended up in a place where we literally could not make payroll. We had to take out a big loan from the state, and we lost control of the district. So from 2003 to 2009, a state administrator was running the district. So lots of small schools, we couldn't pay our bills. That set us up for years of fights about school closures. So from 2004 to 2018, we closed about 18 schools. And that was particularly tough because at the time, charter school enrollment was booming. And there's a state law that says that we had to offer the buildings to charter schools. Since that, another state law has been passed that says we don't have to approve new charters if we think they're a financial threat to OUSD. So charters are not as much a part of the conversation as they used to be. But in the 2004 to 2018 period, like that made it real tough to close schools. We get to 2017, our superintendent is Kyla Johnson Trammell. She's like, we still need to close schools. We're going to do this thing called the blueprint process. It's incredibly controversial. There are hunger strikes. Board meetings get shut down, there's protests, votes are voted in favor of the plan and then reversed, votes are voted against the plan and then reversed. It's like hugely dramatic. And then in 2020, COVID happens, and the federal government sends hundreds of millions of dollars to Oakland. And that was great. It also enabled us to stop having this really tough school closure conversation for a little while, right? Because we got these one-time funds. They were like, great, we can pay our bills now. We don't need to have these terrible arguments. And then another super important point of context, while we were making those plans to close schools, the ACLU filed a complaint that said that the plans were racist because they used data points like, you know, test scores and enrollment to determine which schools to close. But in a school district where there are a bunch of structural reasons that some schools are under-enrolled and struggling, like it's not surprising that those metrics led us to close disproportionately Black, low-income special education schools. So the California Department of Justice was like, yeah, this system is not good. You can't close schools in that way because that is racist. And so then recently, we're going to try to go real fast through this. So funding ends. So all of a sudden, we're back in acute budget crisis. The board is like, we're going to do this thing called the 3 Rs process, and that's how we will make a plan to close schools. In November 2024, a new board is elected, and now the OEA, the teachers union, has a majority, and they effectively shelve the 3 Rs process. They're like, we don't, no, we're not doing that. We don't like that plan. In April of 2025, the board separates with Kyla Johnson Trammell, the superintendent who is trying to plan to close schools. Entering this school year, the district's financial team estimated that we had a $100 million deficit and we might run out of money by the end of the school year. In December, the interim superintendent, now the permanent superintendent, Denise Sadler, presented what's called a fiscal stabilization plan, or what they called a fiscal stabilization plan. It included laying off 400 FTEs. The board eventually approved those layoffs. In February of this year, we also gave teachers a raise of about 11%. And net those things, like after you factor in the teacher raises and some of the cost reduction work we did and some increased state funding, the district now projects we have a deficit of about $37 million. So that's like the timeline, real fast. So let's talk about the fiscal stabilization plan, which is the plan that the superintendent presented in December that the board approved. Yeah. So first, the board gave the superintendent these priorities. They were like, whatever plan you make, this is what you need to take into account. No school closures, cut the central office first. We should be trying to drive increased attendance and enrollment because that increases our revenue. It means we don't have to make so many cuts. We shouldn't rely on one-time funds, and we should be more fiscally responsible and transparent. So this is the plan they made line by line. It has a lot of things in it. Some ones to note are they cut the central office. That's that first line, $21 million. Like they cut it a lot. And there is an additional line to cut it more, like an additional 15 to 20%. They also cut at school sites. There was something like a 7.5 to 10% cut across the board. There were additional things in the plan that like the how they would happen was very unclear. So you'll see a 10% cut in special education funding. Special education expenditures have been increasing steadily in every district across the country. They're one of the reasons that school districts are struggling with expenses. It was unclear like how are we gonna reverse that trend and save money on special education? There were also some what I would call fund management strategies. So the district has different pots of money it could spend for different reasons. There's one pot of money called supplemental and concentration that the district is given specifically because we have a high number of students with acute needs. So like English language learners, foster youth, and those supplemental and concentration funds are supposed to be spent on the needs of those students. The district decided, we have whole schools that are almost all those types of students. So we'll just pay for those entire schools out of our supplemental and concentration funds. So there was some like accounting movement of expenses between funds like that. The grand total, you can see at the bottom is $100 million. That sounds good, right? The deficit's $100 million. That's where we need to be. But it was sort of unclear, like, is this over multiple years that we're saving $100 million? Is this in 1 year we're saving $100 million? So I told you the board's priorities before. I just want to editorialize a little on which of those the plan actually did. So it definitely avoided school closures. It did cut central office. It also definitely cut things for students in schools. Like it just turns out there was no way to close the budget gap without doing that. They wanted to enhance efforts to improve attendance and enrollment. We actually did the opposite. We cut the enrollment stabilization team that does most of the work to market enrollment in OUSD, to like reach out and help families enroll. Those people are all gone. We cut a lot of attendance case managers. Like that didn't happen. We did reduce reliance on one-time funds. That's great. We've cut a lot of people from the finance team. I do not think fiscal controls, monitoring, and transparency have gotten better. So where are we now? Uh, so this is my like best understanding of where we net out on the $100 million deficit. And I will say this is me like piecing together numbers across multiple presentations and also making some inferences. And this is part of what drives some people who watch the board crazy because it feels like it should be more clear than this, right? Like I shouldn't have to piece this slide together to tell you where we're at. How you feel about that depends on how much you trust the district's current leadership. Some people feel like, well, like the district has never been that good at communicating about finances, and finances are hard and they're just struggling. That's why it's not clear where we're at. Other people feel like they're not being honest because there's some uncomfortable truths under there that, they just don't want to talk about with the public. I tend to lean more towards like, I do think fiscal reporting is hard. I think it's hard to communicate about these things. But what makes me anxious is because we don't have super clear reporting, we also don't have a certainty on how far we've progressed towards closing the budget gap. So just to run through the numbers really quickly, the structural deficit was about $100 million year to year, more in expenses than revenue. We added to that by giving teachers raises. I think that was great. I want teachers to have raises, but it did add to our deficit. We think we've made about $70 million worth of progress on the fiscal stabilization plan that I showed you. That's what the district is saying. It's sort of hard to understand how they got to that number because there's definitely things in the plan like increasing attendance that did not happen this year. Like the district has attendance dashboards. We can see they projected they were going to increase attendance by 2%, which would have saved or increased revenue by $10 million. They increased attendance by 0.5%, which that's great. But like none of the reports say have we replaced that money that we planned on saving in that way with some other thing? Like we don't know. And then there has been some additional money coming in from the state, which is great. The state should adequately fund education. So that puts the remaining deficit at $30 million. And the plan for next year has kind of a placeholder in it that says $30 million in board directed stabilization, which means we need to find some way to save $30 million more. And then they are hoping, with good reason, that there will be additional state funding. Could be as much as $12 million. If that happens, now it's $18 million of gap that we need to fill. Uh, so really important to know is principals are having very strong feelings about how the board has managed this crisis. Two-thirds of them signed a letter to the board, which is like, it's a very unusual thing to happen. And they made some points in the letter that I think are worth knowing about. One is they said, hey, after these people that you have taken out of the budget go away, we're going to be struggling to pursue the basic conditions for success. Like it's going to be hard to operate schools. And then the other thing that they said is, we think we should consider closing schools. We know there are equity concerns about closing schools. We have equity concerns about what is happening right now because we are gradually starving schools in a way that makes it impossible for them to serve students. And the way I kind of think about this is you can imagine the district has been in a boat that's slowly sinking due to its financial issues. And at one point, we were like, we got to do something. So we just threw a bunch of stuff overboard. It is good that we stopped the boat from sinking. Good job. The question we need to ask now is, did we throw something off the boat that we needed to get where we are trying to go? And that is the thing that is unclear at this point. And that's, I think, a question that's really important to see people, the board, district leadership grappling with over the next couple of months. One way to think about that question is like sort of what's our base model of a school? And we might say like, hey, we want to keep 80 schools. We want micro schools. We want neighborhood schools kids can walk to. If we're doing that, to make those schools financially sustainable, we need to run them differently than you think about most schools being run. So it's like teachers doing multiple grades, principals teaching a class, kids go to the park for recess. But we can decide that if that's what we want as a community. An alternative to that is larger schools with more programs, librarians, reading specialists, EP classes, electives. Those things are paid for with scale, right? It just makes it easier to pay for those things when you have larger enrollment at a school site. And there are lots of questions about how we get there equitably, like how do we arrange transportation? How do we plan to get to that state? But that's another valid choice the community can make. And, there are lots of other models. We could have a hybrid between the two, but we haven't had a clear conversation about where are we trying to go and is the money that we're spending pointing us in that direction? Another way to ask this question is, does our spending align with our strategy? And the things that you see in front of you these are the district's kind of four strategic pillars. These are what they're trying to do for our students. This is the vision. And we actually have a process for aligning expenditures to a strategic vision like this. It's called the local control and accountability plan process. And this fiscal stabilization thing that we just did cut a whole bunch of stuff that was in the LCAP plan. We just like took a knife to it and we're like, we can't do this, can't do that, can't do this. And we haven't yet had a conversation about like, okay, how are we going to take the money that we have left and focus it on what is most important for our students, for our schools, for our communities? And I guess I want to take a step back because I know I talk about numbers, I talk about finances a lot. It can sound like that's what I care about, but that's not what I care about or anybody really cares about. What we care about is this stuff, right? Like what we care about is 1 in 3 students in Oakland are reading on grade level, and our budget is how we commit to solving those problems. It's an expression of what's important to us. We should be spending money in Oakland in a way that focuses on the things that are most important, like what's expressed on this slide. And I don't think the planning has yet gotten to the point that we've sort of realigned our expenditures to these priorities. So the board's record, uh, as I've been alluding to, the board kind of has a group that is OEA endorsed. They're very opposed to school closures. The screenshot here is from an OEA flyer, I think. Uh, and then we have 3 additional board members, Patrice Berry, Mike Hutchinson, your board member, and Thompson. And they don't always vote in that way. Like there are votes that kind of cut across those lines, but generally that is how they align. Um, this is totally my take on is the board doing a good job. So they cut at least $40 million, right? Like the FTE layoffs were $40 million. They kept Oakland from running out of money at least through this year. And that's really good, right? It was a hard choice, a hard vote. They took it. We're able to maintain local control. They gave teachers a raise. That's good. Teachers deserve to be well paid. They're doing work to limit contractor spending, right? Like Rachel Latta in particular has this procurement task force. They're doing real work to try to reduce that money going to outside contracts. Where I get a little bit more mixed is they stopped another planning process, and then it took a year to get this fiscal stabilization plan in place. They also separated with leaders that disagreed with them, like Kyla Johnson Trammell, our old superintendent, and Lisa Grant Dawson, our old chief budget officer. And this kind of falls in the bucket of like some other things I've mentioned. How you feel about it depends on how you feel about the direction that Oakland was headed in before this board came in and took power. And if you agree with them that we were headed in the wrong direction and there was momentum towards closing schools and that should be avoided at all costs, then these things are not yellow, they're green. I feel like it makes me anxious that we had a plan to have a conversation about restructuring and we kind of threw it out the window and it took us so long to make another plan. Things that I feel like are a little bit more objectively read, uh, they made cuts without a vision, like we talked about. Uh, They accidentally cut after school funding by trying to cap contractor spending. So this is like a little bit nuanced, but I think it's a good example of the kind of thing that makes some people worried about this board. So some board members like Bruhard and Batchelor tried to pass a resolution that limited contractor spending at some amount. I think it was maybe the state average. And that's partly because they have a really strong belief that contractor spending is the primary problem. And they brought it before the board, and just the district financial leadership at the time was like, oh, this is really ambiguously worded. It's not going to do what you want it to do. This is not a good idea. And they sort of on the dais opened up a Google Doc and started to edit it in real time. And the motion passed, even though the district financial team was like, we don't know about this. And then the way it got implemented was because some of our largest contractor spending goes to after school programs, the district ended up sending out an email to principals. It's like, sorry, we can't do after school anymore. And, to the board's credit, they quickly reversed it. But it's watching moments like that kind of give you an impression of like, oh, are we like making the choices that we need to make as thoughtfully as we need to make them? And sort of on a related point, as somebody who watches every meeting, uh, the meetings are not purposeful or productive. And I think that both falls on the board majority. They really like to try to relay a positive narrative. So we spend a lot of time talking about great things that are happening in our school, and that's good. We should celebrate our successes, but I do not think we are allocating time or running meetings in a way that creates real structure around the hard conversation we need to have around the budget. We're not holding staff accountable to bringing materials that allow us to have that hard conversation. We're not running meetings in a disciplined way. All of that is like, it's a little bit Robert Rules of Orderly, but it's important. Like the meetings are not allowing us to make the right decisions. And then, for folks in the room who are represented by Mike Hutchinson, who I think is most of you, uh, he is a significant contributor to how argumentative the board meetings are. And I have to say, like, a lot of the time, I'm really glad to have his voice in the conversation because he is by far the clearest communicator about what is going on. Like, he stays on message and brings up the budget every single time he is at the mic and is consistently narrating very clearly for the community. Like, this is where we've been, this is what we needed to do, this is what we didn't get done. And all of that's great. But also, he is like 100% message clarity, 0% olive branch, like 0% trying to reach out and build bridges with other board members. He will pick a fight on a matter of process that is like not material. Like in a recent board meeting, President Bruhard tried to pass a resolution saying that we should have the more important items for public discussion at the beginning of the meeting so the community was still there. And he objected very strongly because it was in the wrong section of the agenda. So I just think he's like a little bit of a purist and a little bit inflexible. Well, not a little bit inflexible. He's very inflexible in ways that sometimes are counterproductive. But again, I'm really glad to have him as such a clear narrator of the history and the budget problems that we're dealing with. So just looking at me, oh my gosh, I've talked for so long. I'll wrap up soon. So what can you do? Overall, I would love for more people to be the constituency for hard choices. And what I mean by this is like people show up at board meetings when their stuff gets cut all the time. Like when we cut some of the restorative justice management layer, all the restorative justice people showed up because they were upset. And of course, good. I'm glad you're expressing your opinion. But the board also needs to know that the community is behind it when they make hard choices, because some things are going to need to get cut. We need a board that can prioritize and say yes to this, no to that. And I think that it will help the board if more people in the community are a vocal constituency for hard choices. Like people understand, like, yes, we need to make trade-offs. I am here for hard choices. And then concretely, one, you can join this thing called the Multi-Stakeholder Engagement Group, which is kind of a community-led effort to have this sort of prioritization conversation that I have been advocating for. If you are like me and are like, I already have very strong opinions about what should happen, if you go to these meetings, you'll find them a little bit slow because they're like they're starting with some like context building, but also you will be exposed to perspectives of people across the different district who have different feelings, and you will be sending the message with your time that you care about having these restructuring conversations. Two is you can email your board member that all their email addresses are up on the website. It's always first name dot last name at OUSD.org. Like, let them know, like, I support her choices. I didn't like what you did at the last board meeting. They really do listen. You can email your state representative and let them know that you support increasing funding to school districts. You could talk to your friends and neighbors. School district elections tend to be incredibly low information. Most people are just not following what's going on. Like, of course, who has all this time to pay such close attention? I celebrate the people in the room, but most people are not like you. And if you talk to your friends and neighbors, that helps people understand the context of what's going on. And then last, of course, vote. You can also subscribe to the Dig, which is the recap newsletter that I write. And that's it. All right. Anybody have any questions? Oh, so nice. You're muted, so I can't hear.
Here. Well, we were heartily clapping. Any questions? Oh, there was that QR. Yeah, if you take a picture, or I can send it to you.
And I don't mean this as a divisive or even gossipy question, but you laid out a bit of a distinction between factions, two factions in the board, it sounded like.
Yeah.
The slide, and I was busy looking at the slide trying to figure out what you were saying. So I'm familiar with Mike Hutchison. He's been a gadfly before he was a board member. Some things stay the same.
Yeah, he has gone on a journey. He used to be like, as you say, a public gadfly, like turning up to board meetings, protesting. Now he is bringing the same scorching rhetoric to the dais, but I think he has also like learned quite a bit about the district's financial challenges and has some pretty reasonable takes on what we need to do to address them. So I I think he is overall, I am glad he is on the board. Sorry to interrupt you. Did you have a specific question?
The folks on the white sheet that says subverting democracy. I don't know what that means or how that played into it. I was so caught by that phrase.
Oh, yeah.
I kind of got lost. So
you're right. I didn't explicitly speak to this, but that's the OEA's messaging about the election. And I would say I don't agree that the rest of the board members are subverting democracy, or that the superintendent of the county, Elise Castro, is subverting democracy. I think the OEA's framing makes this conversation more difficult. They are really good at communicating clearly scary things, and the district tends to be pretty bad at communicating about the nuance behind the choices that are being made. That's why I put that slide or that screenshot on there.
Okay. Yeah. So it's okay.
I cut out a little bit while you were explaining that, Anna, but I think you were saying that that was a poster or some kind of messaging that was on.
Yeah. It's like a teachers union flyer about those board members.
Yeah, maybe it's not feedback on the slide that it was confusing, but are these two factions the way these people are, and is that how it's playing out right now? Or what is it? I haven't been to a meeting in a million years. I don't know what the dynamic is. And so if there's any room to work at all cooperatively and move forward, it sounds like you're just
I do think like I would especially commend Patrice Berry for her work on collaboration. Like she recently got President Brewhart's support on a resolution to make a plan for the old district headquarters and what to do with that facility, that's like a controversial issue, what we should be doing with our unused facilities. And Barry and Brewhart came to the table together on that, which is great. So it's not like a, black and white split in the way that, congressional votes these days tend to be. Barry Sometimes votes with a majority. Thompson often votes with a majority. Hutchinson almost never votes with a majority.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you.
Well,
Go ahead.
I do, and I'm sorry to keep you longer. So is there any topics that aren't dealing with the budget and the restructuring? Is there anything that is being, anything new they're bringing to the table, or is it just sort of these same old arguments?
Um, there's good work going on in the district, supported in some cases by the board members. Like, we had a presentation on the school-based safety teams in the last meeting and how that's replaced the OUSD police, and they do more positive violence interruption and less arresting kids. There are really positive things happening around trying to reduce chronic absence, which is it's like kids who are absent more than 10% of the school year have a significantly reduced chance of successful academic outcomes, and the district is trying really hard to turn it around. A huge amount of the air in the room gets sucked up by the budget conversations. I thought somebody was going to ask me this, because this is usually what people ask. So I'll just show you the slide, which I had ready in the appendix. Yeah.
Yeah, please. Yeah, please talk about it.
I think a reason that a lot of people are dubious about closing schools is that there is some research out there that suggests that it doesn't save money. And Oakland has had experiences in the past closing schools where we didn't save money. Like when a charter school took over that campus and took the enrollment from the closed school, that doesn't save us money, that loses us money. Uh, my read of the research is it's mixed, because whether or not you save money depends on what you do. Like charters aren't as much of a threat anymore, which is great. You still have to communicate clearly to the families and make a plan for how they're going to be transported to the school that they're moved to. And like Oakland has done some things in the past, like an opportunity ticket that allows people priority enrollment in other schools. So there's like plans you can put in place to make a school closure go better. We have not always done that by any means, but I think the answer to do school closures save money is they can, especially in an era where charters are not as much as a threat, but you need to do them the right way.
Any questions?
I just have one. I was going back in history to the timeline. It was really interesting to me the 40 million, the 40 new schools that were opened by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And then very swiftly, it seems like then there's a move over to, maybe that wasn't that quick, but the closing of the school seemed to happen pretty quickly thereafter. And I'm curious to know, were these new buildings that opened, or were these schools, like, could I get just a little bit more backstory on those 40 new schools?
I don't think I can answer with authority whether they were new buildings. I know in some cases it was like split campuses in the same building, and that's why some of the time when we're talking about school closures, we're actually talking about merging two schools in the same campus. But I can't speak to beyond that.
It was a trend. It was in the zeitgeist that these small schools were really effective. Bill and Melinda Gates decided that was going to be one of their philanthropy foci. So they set it up in Oakland. Oakland gets a lot of attention, and it seems like it can be a great lab for people who want to do good things. And then when things change, they pull out, and that's what happened. But also, what they did was they just created these small schools at existing schools. like Fremont had a number of them. Tech, where your daughter is now, never did have the small schools. They had the academies, and now I think I forget what the new word is, but they didn't have the physical small schools. The physical small schools also had their own leadership. And so they were burdensome. And, you know, there was no, my understanding, so a little before my kids were in that phase of it, but my understanding too was that there was not a lot of what does the community want a small school around. So it was, you know, it looked good for the time that it was being implemented, but it didn't really roll out well. And then once it wasn't funded, it was a one-time funding. And there was a lot of overhead, and it caused a lot of grief and problems. And then you get this fighting, right? That just is a natural byproduct of giving people something and then taking it away.
Yeah, it's really kind of stunning to just see the 40 plus new schools, and then immediately after that to see the point of facing fiscal insolvency. OUSD takes $100 million emergency state loan triggering a state takeover. Like, it needs to happen quite quickly after that, and you know, opening 40 schools. That's really interesting, and I'm curious about that. Like, to get more information.
Yeah,
Question.
I wish I had an OG Oakland, although it seems like you've got an audience member next to you who has some expertise here who could explain the takeover.
Remember the conversation.
Yeah.
I do have one more question. I'm sorry.
Do you mind if we ask? I want to ask the people. I've seen a couple people come on.
Oh, no,
camera.
sure. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
people on Zoom. Anybody on Zoom have a question before we go back to the room? Or anything? Is there anything in the chat?
Yes, I submitted a question in chat.
Ooh.
There we go.
Oh, questions in chat.
Can you see it, Anna, or do you want me to read it? I know you're screen sharing.
I can read it if you want. I heard the OEA board majority describe that they pushed financial staff, and only by pushing did they find some money that was hidden away. This speaks to staff not serving elected board members. Do you see that too?
I'd say this framing to me is a little unfair. I think the staff, you know, particularly Lisa Grant Dawson, the previous chief budget officer, and her team was much more conservative. Like, they didn't want to use restricted funds for things that they weren't really clearly allowed to be used for. They didn't want to use, you know, Measure N and other funds in ways that they didn't think was strictly in compliance with the voters' will. They didn't want to assume positive things were going to happen in the future. I don't think it's reasonable to say that they were hiding, or certainly I haven't seen anything that makes me think that they were hiding money. I do think Lisa Grant Dawson thought that the board's plan was unreasonable. Like, I showed you those priorities. I'll show them to you again. She basically, when she was still around, was coming to board meetings and being like, you can't do this. You have to take out a state loan. Like, that's the only way to do this. And you know, to the board's credit, they haven't taken out a state loan. I don't think they have delivered on all these priorities. So to me, that like lends some credence to Lisa Grant Dawson's objection. So to summarize, I do think it's reasonable to characterize the relationship between the previous district administration and the OEA endorsed board majority as somewhat antagonistic. I don't think it's reasonable to say that the previous administration was like hiding money from the board.
Have you, one last question, I'm so sorry. Funding pensions, as the district and all districts, I guess, California have to pre-fund pension obligations. I don't know anything about it, and I just am wondering if that is ever an area that you've looked into or are interested in.
I do not know anything about pension obligations, and I'm now that you mention it, shocked. I have never heard it discussed within the like little school budget nerd communities that I'm part of. I assume that they come out of some other pot of money than the district's like annual operating budget, which is why I like that's the only reason I can think of why they're not more commonly discussed in this picture. But like you're right, it's a great question. I don't know how we're doing on funding our pension obligations. Oh, the answer might be that it's state level, right? There's like CalPERS and CalSTRS, right? I like when I was a school employee, it was a state level pension. So that might be why we don't talk about it as part of Oakland pensions or Oakland politics.
So it's it's redirecting at a big level. Before the money would be distributed, it's not there to distribute to the districts because it's pre-funding the retirement system at the state level, maybe. I'll find out.
Maybe, yeah.
But I just wondered if that was a part of the conversation too.
I know you have a depth of expertise that I'm glad to have in the room.
Any other questions in the room or on Zoom? Okay. Thank you so much, especially from zooming in from out of town and yeah, really grateful. This is super fascinating. I know 100 times more than I did 45 minutes ago. So I'm totally grateful for that. Thank you so much for being willing to give up your time and to be here. Yeah, and thank you folks for joining on Zoom and for you all for contributing to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks so much. And you definitely got a few more readers to the dig. And enjoy Santa Cruz.
I will. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And I put my email address in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me, especially the excellent question asker.
I'll find out more.
Yeah, and
Should we put up the chat so that we can see?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're at Park Presbyterian, so we are here. I'm sorry if we.
Yeah, we had the wrong address. We apologize.
Oh, you're on mute.